Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 11th of January 2024. I have so much information to share with you. This will become an information Gatling gun. So bear with me. Let's try and make this as efficient as possible. Okay, first of all, we'll go to the military aid, humanitarian aid, financial aid, and military equipment section. Okay, the EU can still produce 1 million artillery shells by this spring, says the European Commissioner Thierry Breton. He said reaching, and we're going to return to this chap a little bit later, he said reaching that target would require cutting exports to non-EU countries as well as pressure from member governments on their arms industries to boost production. In other words, we can do this 1 million shells. Loads of people are naysaying the EU, but he's saying we can do it, but we will actually have to stop producing shells for ourselves and stop fulfilling contracts to export to other nations outside the EU. As long as they're happy with that, then we should be able to squeeze out 1 million shells for Ukraine. As I've said before, rather than being hypercritical about the EU for maybe not reaching their target, they didn't have to set their target and they didn't have to go and do that, say those things and pledge their support. I think we should be celebrating that they want to aim high, and if they fall short, rather than being hypercritical about the EU, let's be like positive that they are trying and they are ramping up production and they will get there. Yeah, I just think it's important that we credit where credit's due, and people that are pulling together and are providing for Ukraine. Yes, we can do more, and there are certain nations in the EU that I think need to be pulled up. And Olaf Scholz has talked about this last couple of days, and we're going to return to Italy in a second. But as Italy, France, and Spain in his crosshairs, they should definitely, I think, be called out a little bit more for Emmanuel Macron is good on the rhetoric. In fact, this is what one of the analysts I was listening to yesterday from Ukraine the latest said, strong on rhetoric, not so strong on actions. Although there are things that happen under the radar, like I've said before, with particularly France and their industrial entities, military industrial entities, but I still don't think they do quite enough. The EU took the first step to approve 50 billion euros for Ukraine. Member states approved a partial negotiation mandate, which allows budget negotiations with the European Parliament. So far, Hungary isn't blocking. Final call expected on February the 1st. Keep our eyes peeled concerning that one, because the alternatives need to be put in place so that that money gets to Ukraine for military aid. But if Hungary doesn't veto what they're proposing, then that's really good news. NATO pledges billions in 2024 arms for Ukraine, as confirmed in a statement following an emergency Ukraine-NATO Council meeting in Brussels. So this has just taken place. It's an emergency meeting meeting requested by Kyiv addressed recent Russian shelling of Ukraine during the New Year holiday. So I don't even remember, as a result of those pretty horrific large-scale saturation attacks over Ukraine during the holiday period, they called this meeting with the UN, and the UN has NATO, and NATO has pledged a bunch of military aid. So that is really good news. Talking about the UN, though, UN plans to allocate $3.1 billion to Ukraine in 2024. The UN will ask international donors for funds and then use them for humanitarian needs, according to Reuters. So that's really good. Everyone seems to be coming together. Bloomberg is reporting that Biden's administration is backing legislation that would let it seize a sum of $300 billion in frozen Russian assets to help pay for reconstruction of Ukraine. Now, this is excellent, and it looks like it is gathering momentum in the political corridors of Washington. However, some people are saying it would be great if that money could be used for military aid rather than reconstruction. It's more important than the military. Military assistance gets to Ukraine than reconstruction assistance at the moment. So there is a little bit of debate around that, but it's really good that sort of policy is being followed through at the moment, and hopefully we'll see this in a number of places around the world, because it's like, in a sense, free money. And this is money that is not coming from budgets that would otherwise, be assigned to healthcare, education, whatever, domestic defense. This is money that's being taken from frozen Russian assets. Okay, Bloomberg is reporting that Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, secretly is urging Hungary's Orban to unlock aid for Ukraine. So perhaps the lack of veto so far for that EU project might have something to do with Meloni. They are, at the end of the day, fairly politically aligned, although Giorgia Meloni's coalition is somewhat more pro-EU, even though they're sort of very right wing in Italy, and actually they're not pro EU at all, especially the coalition partners she has. So there's a lot of similarity between these two, except that Giorgia Meloni is definitely anti-Putin, whereas Orban isn't. In December 2023, Orban blocked the $50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine. EU leaders will seek to reassess this during the emergency summit on the 1st of February. And it's that new project or new package that is so far not vetoed, but there's still time. The time has come for incisive diplomacy in Ukraine. So this is interesting because it's on the back of Olaf Scholz pointing the finger at Italy, France, and Spain. So now that Italy's defense minister, Guido Crosetto, for the third time in recent months, has said the time has come for incisive diplomacy. Of course, earlier, Zelensky has said that Russia would only agree to a pause for replenishing its depleted forces. There are some rumors that Italy is going to attach aid to Ukraine with negotiation provisos, which would be a little bit controversial. So I'm not a fan of that at all, obviously, because it means that here Italy appear to be trying to force Ukraine to the negotiating table, and they're just not ready for that. And actually, Russia aren't ready for that. They don't want that. Lots of countries reconfirmed their stance on Ukraine. Italy, again, going to Italy, a firm ally of Ukraine, has also pledged more military aid this year. So there is a pledge that's going through. The lower house of the Italian parliament voted in favour of a resolution to continue military support to Ukraine, as well as supporting collective assistance within the framework of NATO, the EU, and international forums. So it looks like things are in the process of being ratified, but and then, as Noel report says, if promises, pledges, supports, words mean nothing without action. Give Ukraine what it needs. That's more in response to the Ukraine NATO Council meeting, but of course there has been some money coming out of that for aid. For military aid. Today in Vilnius, so this was actually yesterday, we reached a number of significant agreements on joint defense production. So he went over to Lithuania, Zelensky, to have a meeting. This is what he says. Ukraine's Ministry of Strategic Industries and the Lithuanian Defense and Security Industry Association signed a memorandum of understanding to support joint projects on drones and electronic warfare, demining equipment, software, and other advanced mil-tech solutions, including in the areas of cybersecurity and communications. So I think Lithuania is one of the coalition members on a cyber warfare coalition. People in the EU have come together in different ways. I don't know if this is outside of the EU as well, or whether this is an EU thing, but some of the Baltic nations are main players in this cyber warfare coalition to help Ukraine defend itself in that context. Of course, they are on the forefront. If you read Jessica Arrow's book, Russia's Trolls, or Putin's Trolls, I can't remember one of those two names. It's really interesting, and a lot of it is focused on the disinformation warfare that's going on in the Baltic states. They are on the front line, as Russia has for a long time been trying to control the narrative there. Letters of intent were also signed by JSC, Ukrainian Defense Industry, with RSI Europe, Broaders Semiconductors, DMEXS, and NT Service. They engage in innovative research and development and production of advanced electronic warfare, remote initiation systems, optics for firearms, and surveillance systems. Ukraine's top aim this year is to reach as many such agreements with partners as possible, while also maximizing new production capacities. The current security situation in Europe necessitates that all countries ramp up defense industry output. The sooner everyone realizes this, the better. And the leader and I understand this goal and are taking action. Ukraine's aim is to develop new capabilities and expand defense production. We are modernizing Europe's arsenal in order to protect freedom for all Europeans. It's that rhetoric that gives unity to Ukraine and Europe. It's like, we're all in this together and we're doing stuff on behalf of you in order to try and facilitate aid coming back from Europe to Ukraine. Lithuania pledges, as a result, almost $220 million in a 3-year support package for Ukraine. Lithuania's defense ministry said that most of the funds from the 2024 to 26 support plan will be allocated for the needs of the Vilnius-led demining coalition in Ukraine. Estonia, so he's now in Estonia today, Zelensky, and they've just announced aid to Ukraine to the amount of 1.2 billion euros until 2027. The Estonian president said that at a press conference in Tallinn, "We will call on the whole world to help Ukraine in freedom and democracy," Alarkasi has said. Now, going back to Lithuania, Geopolitical, the state defense concern in Ukraine, starts a partnership with 4 Lithuanian defense companies that we've just heard about from Zelensky. These companies specialize in the creation of sites, including thermal imaging, modern systems, remote initiation, detonation, electronic warfare devices, and communication, etc. Now, that I presume I'm re-saying that because of this statement from the economy minister in Ukraine. Ukraine to launch 5 joint ventures with Western arms companies in 2024, and I presume that's completely separate from what's been announced in Lithuania. So there is this massive project to ramp up defense military capacity within Ukraine, as well as working hand in glove with military concerns around Europe and the US. Okay, and that's why we're seeing Rheinmetall. In fact, another German defense manufacturer said they're setting up a repair shop in Ukraine as well. We'll come to that in a second. Rheinmetall and all BAE systems, getting involved in Ukraine. There is an awful lot of stuff going on, so we can get all concerned about. We can get concerned about the $61 billion held up in the US, and that is a massive concern, and that really does get me down. But on the other hand, there are things happening not at state level, but at sort of bilateral level between Ukraine and individual military industrial concerns around the world. That means that Ukraine are improving their situation, and it's a long-term project. It's not something that you can have it's not like buying 1,000 missiles off a shelf. There's 1,000 missiles, we'll have them, right, good, that took a couple of days, we've got them, let's fire them. This is something that will take months and months and years, but eventually, and if this war is a long-term war, then actually it looks like Ukraine in being able to initiate working with all of these military industrial concerns from around the world will be in a far, far better position from an industrial manufacturing military standpoint than Russia will be, especially under increasing sanctions. A German company, Flensburger Fahrzeuggesellschaft, is building a center for the repair of armored vehicles in Ukraine. So that's another one. That's the one I was just talking about. Adding to what Rheinmetall and I presume BAE Systems as well are doing already. I think Rheinmetall already have a repair shop in Ukraine, or is it still being built? It might still be being built. Anyway, Ukraine continues to create new brigades at the same time. The number is already 115. The last officially created brigade is 150th Mechanized Brigade. And as Thomas Tyner says here, now there are 115 active combat brigades in 2024, although whether they are all combat effective at the moment, I can't tell you. But when you look at all of these European nations, as stated here, including like the UK on top of that, there are 118 active combat brigades, and Ukraine has 115. I mean, that's insane. Ukraine defends all of Europe, and Europe at least needs to provide Ukraine with all the weapons that Ukraine has asked for, says Thomas Tyner. Yep, no disagreement for me, that's for sure. Estonian defense company Milrem R finally shares feedback by the AFU regarding the 14 delivered unmanned ground vehicles financed by Germany. Again, Germany behind that. Of these 14 financed by Germany, 7 are used for Kazovac, so evacuating casualties, and 7 are route clearance configuration, or ROCUS, with payloads from French defense manufacturer Sinem Système Industriel. The company says that the Ukrainian forces are taking full advantage of their Themis UGVs. Besides their intended roles like demining and Kazovac, the Themis UGVs have also been used by Ukrainian engineers to carry out anti-tank mines to accelerate mining operations. Furthermore, quote, the operators of the UGVs noted that during the muddy season, the Themis can act as a resupply vehicle instead of heavy trucks that tend to get stuck. Also, the small size and low height of the UGV makes its discovery by the enemy difficult, and that has increased its survivability. That's really good news. And we know the Russians are using some of these, but this is a slightly more substantial variant than some of the ones I've seen. Good news that Ukrainians are getting their hands on some of this innovative kit. Now, over to the Russians. Russian media is reporting that they're starting to produce a new glide bomb. Russian plans to begin production of the Drel in 2024. Russian state media TASS reported on the 10th, citing Rostec, the Russian state-owned arms manufacturer. This is a bit of a worry because they've had quite a lot of success with those FAB and KAB 500 plus bombs. Right, Robert Magyar, Magyar's Eagles, the Birds of Magyar. He's the big drone guy serving at the moment in the Krinky area. He's announced that Russians have started to use FPV drone AI guided drones, so artificial intelligence on their drones. This is something we've been talking about previously. If you check out the Tochny podcast I was on the other day, there was a lot of talk about the technical capacities or capabilities, of drones. Ukrainians are trying to catch up on the artificial intelligence guided drones side of things. In the first 9 days of this year, he has intercepted 179 first-person view drones out of 234, which is about 76%. They aim to reach 95% of drones that they have acquired being intercepted acquired as targets. So they have improved from previous stats, but it's only marginally improved. I think the previous ones are like 75%. So, okay, this is... Oh, no, I've just gone to the wrong place. Let's go backwards. My goodness, I'm getting ahead of myself. Right. A new cargo ship with Shahed drones has arrived in Russia from Iran, according to Natalia Humaniuk. Quote, Iran's support for the terrorist country continues, and this means that new drones may be prepared for launch, she said. That is a worry. If we start seeing drones, Shaheds, being used a lot over the next 2 or 3 days, that is because they are arriving from Iran, and this again would show you that they're using the aerial threats at the rate that they produce or procure them. Exactly what I've been saying. Chris Owicki has a thread on the increasing number of criminals and mercenaries from Africa fighting with the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. In the latest instances, a convicted criminal from Cape Verde. I showed you a prisoner of war from Somalia early on. This is a convicted criminal from Cape Verde, appeared in a propaganda video, and a Somali was captured by Ukrainian forces. It would be really interesting if the Russians are actually going round to prisons abroad and saying, yeah, we'll take your prisoners, so you don't have to pay for rehabilitation, you don't have to pay to incarcerate them. We'll take your prisoners and we'll use them in our armed forces, and then we'll offer them freedom after they've served, maybe as citizens in Russia, with the full knowledge that they're probably not going to survive. I don't know. That's my speculation, but goodness me, wouldn't that be interesting? That's what they're doing. They're not just taking prisoners from their own country; they're taking prisoners from other countries as well. Okay, North Korea may sell new types of tactical guided missiles to Russia in addition to the expected supply of short-range ballistic missiles for the use in the war against Ukraine. My goodness, if this is the case, what is the rest of the world doing about it? NATO, the UN, EU, etc., etc. But also, what's South Korea doing about it? North Korea uses Ukraine as a testing ground for ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear charges. This was announced by the permanent representative of South Korea at the UN, Hwang Jung-kook, Sky News wrote. Now, if that's the case, I think my personal opinion is that South Korea should get really peed off and start saying, well, if that's how you're going to be, this is how we're going to be. And I'd love to see, and I think it's justified, I'd love to see South Korea start being much more explicit in their support of Ukraine. And I don't know whether this would mean they'd have to change their constitution or something, but provide weapons directly to Ukraine, or certainly a lot more weapons indirectly to Ukraine by giving them to non-warring nations that can, as a backfill. Right, moving on to political subjects, geopolitical subjects. Ukraine's president has arrived in Estonia, as I've mentioned this morning. So he'll be trying to. We've already heard that there's $1.2 billion worth of kit coming out of Estonia as a result of that. It's really useful. There's a lot of support for Ukraine in that neck of the woods. And talking about that neck of the woods, Finland has apparently said it will keep all its border crossings with Russia shut. They were due to be reopened on the 15th. Closure is due to Russia deliberately funneling large numbers of migrants from Kenya, Morocco, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria and Yemen to the Finnish border. And that's as according to Sky News. And here, Glasnost gone. Right. Kiev Independent reports that Robert Fico, the Slovakian leader who's very pro-Russia, it seems, decries Western strategy on Ukraine, saying Russia also needs security guarantees. Hey, let's be nice to the criminal here. They need guarantees of their safety. Russia's invaded Ukraine. They need guarantees for their safety. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico broadly criticised the West's approach towards the Russia-Ukraine war in a column for the Pravda newspaper published on the 9th. The West strategy for Ukraine simply does not work. It has turned out to be an absolute failure, says Robert Fico. Quote, from the very beginning, I rejected a black and white vision of the conflict in Ukraine as wanted in Washington or Brussels. The war has its roots in 2014. Its causes are both in the development of the Ukrainian political scene and its attitude toward fellow citizens of Russian nationality, and of course in the total influence of the United States on everything that happened there. Holy... This is basically the Russian narrative. This is the Kremlin narrative. That is verbatim Putin, Peskov, Medvedev. Gee whiz. Like, I did that long extra yesterday where I looked at exactly this narrative, and it's like blaming blaming NATO and blaming the US for 2014. It completely ignores actually what Ukraine want themselves. As if Ukraine is merely a political football between NATO, the US, and Russia. And it completely ignores Russian meddling, to which NATO is arguably reacting. It's just so naive, or it's just cynical. And it's just someone who is in a pocket of the Kremlin. I would argue he's just in a pocket of the Kremlin. He knows what he's saying. But you've now got a European leader spouting this absolute garbage, and that is dangerous. Right. We're going to get on to US election. A few things to say about that I think are pretty interesting. Putin will throw everything he has at the 2024 election campaign in the United States, says Edward Hunter Christie in what he calls in his prediction. He's a senior research fellow at the FIIA, a PhD. I've referred to him before, Belgian Royal Military Academy as well. So what else did he say? Billions of dollars, hundreds of witting agents, many more unwitting ones. This is so true. So Russia will pay people to be trolls and to do trolling stuff. They'll pay people in those countries to spread nonsense directly. But there are also many, many unwitting agents that will spread Russian propaganda. And I've come across many of them, and you will have come across many of them in the threads. For example, we look at the US here, there'll be many people who will be... They'll not be Russian agents, they'll be paid by Russia. There'll be a certain political persuasion that will spread the disinformation rhetoric about Ukraine, corruption in Ukraine, or this or that, it's kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene rhetoric. They'll happily spread that, and they are the unwitting agents of Russia. The main focus, as always, will not be cybersecurity or hacking, but political subversion using mainly human agents of influence and masses of useful idiots, boosted massively online by large troll factories and vast bot formations. This is my single biggest worry. Like, talking about politically over the next however many years, and also going back for the last 8 years. This is what Russia has been doing, it's what they continue to do, and it's what they will do. Because, do you know what? It's freaking easy. You can spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on a war that gives you very little return on investment. In fact, it screwed you over. As I've said many times, if Russia had spent all that money they spent on the war on bot farms and troll farms, they would have done far, far more damage to the world's political institutions. and countries and the political landscape. They would have wrecked the political landscape across the world with that much investment. China are starting to do it. Russia have been doing it, and they're experts at it. If we don't fight against that, I mean, that's what the fighting in Ukraine is about. That's a fighting on the ground to try and stop this political subversion. This will be combined with discrete incidents, operations in the real world, and given the stakes, don't be surprised if there are physical provocation, acts of intimidation, and even assassination attempts. Deniable, of course. America's Secret Services had better be ready. Any candidate who is displeasing to Moscow is a potential target. To mitigate this likely onslaught, being only on the defensive will not do. Time to design bold measures to dissuade and defeat Moscow's interest in political subversion before it's too late. This is so important. So there are a couple of Ukraine the Latest podcasts over the last 2 years that have got cyber security information experts actually on, and there was I remember one really clearly that was talking exactly about this, and she was saying it's not good enough just to soak this pressure up. We need to be having a disinformation, like a positive disinformation, creating positive narratives about what you could have, what you could be. We need to be taking disinformation war back to Russia. But that's not happening. It's just looking at Russia and trying to fight these forest fires in the disinformation landscape, in the information landscape. We need to be taking it back to Russia. So all of that, I think that this is, goodness me, if nothing else, pay attention to those words for the next year. 2024 is the biggest year in the history of humanity for elections. It's so super important. Democracy is under attack. And it's under attack from authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. Now, going to the US election, it's really interesting because everyone's saying Trump's got it in the bag. Trump, he's got it in the bag. But he's got his legal woes, and he's under 91. I mean, he's already been found guilty of sexual abuse in the E. Jean Carroll case, and et cetera, and now that's going through defamation as well. He's up for 91 counts and 4 different cases right now, and there are other ones, in the pipeline. It's a real legal quagmire that he's presently in. But still, people are saying, well, the polls are suggesting he's a shoo-in, he's going to win. Interesting, the first poll suggesting that might not be the case. And we'll have a look at this. So this is Nikki Haley beats Donald Trump in a key swing state, according to Newsweek, from new polls. I think they're Quinnipiac polls. Oh, no, Detroit News polls. So former South Carolina governor and presidential hopeful Nikki Haley would beat Donald Trump in Michigan in potential November the 5th head-to-head matchup against incumbent President Joe Biden, according to recent polling from Detroit News. According to the latest polling by the Michigan newspaper, in direct contrast against Biden during the general election, Haley would beat the Democrat by a margin of 10 percentage points with 44% of the vote against Biden's 34%. Haley's presidential bid, which had been stalling for much of 2023, got a huge boost last November after Americans for Prosperity Action, a GOP donor group founded by Charles Koch. So the Koch brothers, I didn't realize were behind. I absolutely despise the Koch brothers, but for all sorts of ideological reasons. But that's massive that they are behind Nikki Haley through its full support behind this former South Carolina governor. Koch, a billionaire, is one of the GOP's biggest donors, so on and so forth. Anyway, this is interesting stuff. Let's go and have a look if there's anything further down here. Newsweek, according to 538, the embattled former president had 61.3% of Republican primary poll as of January the 9th. This is in general. DeSantis and Haley trailed him respectively 12.4% and 11.4% of the vote. But this is good news for Nikki Haley that she's in this one particular poll out ahead of Donald Trump. And that's a first of its kind. Now, add to this what's happened yesterday. So what happened yesterday is that Chris Christie, another one of the potential Republican, he is a candidate. No, he's a nominee. I always get confused. Nominee or candidate. Anyway, he's pulled out. Why that's significant? Well, it's interesting. One, he was the only outwardly anti-Trump campaigner, and he was very, very explicit about that. But two, he was very pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine. And that's what Nikki Haley is also campaigning on. That's one of the USPs there, where the rest of the field aren't, now that Mike Pence has pulled out as well. So what you would expect, and Chris Christie defended Nikki Haley against Vivek Ramaswamy in a debate, and they seem like the two closest. And I would imagine most of his supporters, and he doesn't have that many supporters, but they will predominantly go, I would think, to Nikki Haley if they go anywhere. And so this then could put Nikki Haley on a much stronger footing. And actually, there is polling form for people to have late surges. I think it was against when Mitt Romney was running, who was against him, had a late surge anyway. I forget now. And so there is form for Nikki Haley being able to be a real genuine threat to Trump, especially if Trump's legal woes continue. Mark Hamill says here, so Luke Skywalker, anyone who's unwilling to say that he's unfit to be president of the United States is unfit themselves to be president of the United States. This must be the benchmark for every candidate. That's what Chris Christie said in his speech where he suspended his campaign. And as Republicans Against Trump says here, Chris Christie's campaign suspending speech was remarkable. It's one of the best political speeches I've heard in a very long time. Do yourself a favor and watch it from beginning to end. I have, actually. I've watched it on double speed. It is a really, really good speech. This is, if you are a defender of democracy, then what he says there is bang on. It's a really good half an hour speech where he suspends his campaign, but he can hold his head high. That man, of all of the nominees, can hold his head high. Now, to add on to this, and this is stuff that's coming out, don't shoot the messenger. This is all really important to get our understanding of what's going to go on in the 2024 elections and how it pertains to Europe and how it pertains to Ukraine, okay? Anyway, this Thierry Breton, who I mentioned earlier, has come out and let this out the bag, which is something that Trump said to Ursula von der Leyen. So the Politico reports this as Trump vowed he'd never help Europe if it's attacked, a top EU official says. By the way, NATO is dead, the former and potential future US president added in a private meeting. So one of Europe's top senior politicians recounted how former US President Donald Trump privately warned that America would not come to the EU's aid if it was attacked militarily. Quote, you need to understand that if Europe is under attack, we will never come to help you and to support you, Trump told European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in 2020, according to French European Commissioner Thierry Breton, who was also present at the meeting at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Quote, by the way, NATO is dead and we will leave. We will quit NATO. So that's that. I said exactly this yesterday. The only way that you won't get American boots on the ground in these situations is if the US goes full isolationist and not only says we're not going to support Europe, but also we're pulling out of NATO so that we aren't legally obliged to support Europe militarily. He added, and by the way, you owe me $400 billion because you didn't pay, you Germans, and you had to pay for defense. Breton said about the tense meeting where the EU's then trade chief Phil Hogan was also present, so on and so forth. That's a big wake-up call, and he may come back, Breton said about Trump. So now more than ever, we know that we are on our own, of course. We are a member of NATO, almost all of us. Of course, we have allies, but we have no other options but to increase drastically this pillar in order to be ready for whatever happens. This is massively fascinating rhetoric and scary rhetoric. Whether it will come to pass, I think there are things that have been put in place in the last National Defense Authorization Act, I think made it harder for the US to leave NATO. I think there was a bit of laying the groundwork for if Trump gets in, there's a realization that Trump might want to pull out of NATO. And I think the US, that NDAA has made it more difficult for Trump to be able to do that unilaterally, right? So obviously American politicians are worried about that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had to put that in place. this is all kind of scary, but this may also give someone like Nikki Haley the chance of genuinely challenging Trump. And add to that this, right? Whether you like it or not, and I know some of you will get annoyed with what I'm going to say now, but one of the main reasons Hillary Clinton didn't get elected and why there was such a really vociferous campaign against her was because she's a woman. I'm absolutely sure of that. In fact, there's plenty of data, I think, to support that as well. And yeah, it's all like, Benghazi, and like, although there's all the double standards of not investigating other things that were much worse, but the email situation. But actually, Trump's done that, and I think Ivanka Trump did that, so on and so forth. Anyway, I am fairly sure Republicans would absolutely love to get one over the Democrats by themselves, by denying Hillary Clinton the first female president and then getting Nikki Haley in and saying, hey, we're progressive. Who's to say that we're misogynistic or anything like this? We're the ones who got the first female president in. You guys didn't. I think that would be pretty nifty for the Republicans to do that, and a bit like the Conservatives in the UK with Margaret Thatcher a long time ago now. But they get that, they could lord that over the other side. So I think the Republicans might have a chance of getting the first female president into power. Now, I'm just going to end on this quote, and this is from The Times. Ministers are deeply concerned about the economic impact of the Red Sea attacks. A Treasury assessment before Christmas warned that disruption to shipping could shrink the British economy by as much as 0.3%, and the figure is now expected to be worse. But this goes back to, and this is all linked to Ukraine, right? And again, I'll link this article in the description below. I spoke to my friend who was, I can't tell you exactly, quite high up in the armed forces, involved in stuff like this, is all I say. And he said in organising stuff that basically armed forces are about defending national interests, and the national interests are economic interests and hegemonic interests. Exactly what I've been saying about why the US wants to support Ukraine, or should want to support Ukraine, because it's in their best interest to do so. So I looked in this at what it is that we have the armed forces for, and the responsibilities are defending the UK, but you can just put US here or any other country that you guys are from. Now, this is what literally the UK government said. This is from the UK government website. We have 7 military tasks: defending the UK and its overseas territories, providing strategic intelligence, providing nuclear deterrence, supporting civil emergency organisations in times of crisis, defending our interests by projecting power strategically and through expeditionary interventions, providing a defence contribution to UK influence, in other words NATO, providing security for stabilisation. All of these first 4 are themselves in order to achieve these last 3, arguably. So the only reason you do get strategic intelligence and provide a nuclear deterrence is so that you can defend your interests by projecting power, blah, blah, blah. And the priorities from 2015 to 2020, I wrote this a few years ago, is protect our people, protect global influence, promote our prosperity, maintain a strategic base and integrated global support network, and manage the Department of State. Those are the priorities of the UK government, or the UK military for the UK government. Right? We're protecting our global influence and promoting our prosperity. And I've read this to you before, but this is a quote from a book that was written in the early 1900s. And it's by Smedley D. Butler, War is a Racket, the anti-war classic by America's most decorated soldier. And just to give you an understanding of why America is interested in Ukraine prevailing, and why the UK is, and why the EU is, it's not just a moral argument. So, although it's that as well. The quote is, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. So that's a former military man saying what his job was, which is to go back, projecting global influence to promote prosperity. Okay, now I'm going to go back to this. Ministers are deeply concerned about the economic impact of the Red Sea attacks. Why do we have naval ships? So why I wrote this article originally is because I was interested in why our naval vessels were out fighting Somali pirates. And I was just having this conversation with my mate who's in the Royal Navy, is saying because those pirates are stopping global trade from blah, 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 blah. And it's all about economic trade and economic influence and economic stability. So when you then go back to what's going on in the Red Sea at the moment with the Houthis sending up rockets and missiles and drones and hijacking ships, the reason why loads of nations, including the Indian Navy, loads of nations have sent their navies out there to help is not because it's a moral obligation at all. They're helping in the Red Sea because it's in our economic interest. And we might well see a 0.3% shrinkage in our economy, which is massive, merely on account of what's going on in the Red Sea. So, why am I saying all that? Because A, it's geopolitically important. But then when we go back to what's going on in Ukraine, and you're talking about energy infrastructure of the world, and supply, when you talk about Russia's hydrocarbons, when you're talking about all the minerals and natural resources in Ukraine, particularly in the east, but also in the west as well. Ukraine is hugely important from an economic point of view, but it's also important from that geopolitical strategic point of view. And so when you have someone like this saying that they would not help Europe, or they would pull out of NATO, or that person doesn't understand how economically connected the US is to the rest of the world. And without having those alliances, and without defending those countries, and without getting involved in those wars, you are abrogating any responsibility and any interaction. You are walking away from any interaction economically then, or you're walking away from the influence on the rest of the world that will allow you to operate economically effectively with the rest of the world. And that kind of isolationist approach, then that's fine if you're cool with that, but you will recede from global power and you will recede from global income. So, yes, you can argue that this is all about US imperialism or UK imperialism or whatever imperialism you want to talk about. Yes, you can argue about that, but the thing about Ukraine is it's also very clearly moral. So the great thing about that, it's not like Iraq where we just kind of went in, we bulldozed in, and it was really about the oil. And yeah, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but it was a right hot mess there. Or, something like Israel-Palestine, which is way, way more complex. This is very much more obvious. Russia, the bad guys, Ukraine are the good guys. But also, there are many other reasons that you should be involved in Ukraine that are to the benefit of the US, to the benefit of the EU, to the benefit of the UK. And we need to understand that. And this should be communicated to people far more readily, but unfortunately it's not. And what is communicated is the EU have not paid enough money, so we're just going to come out of NATO. Screw you guys, we're not going to help Europe, and we're just going to become isolationists. That's what, but lots of people like that, but they don't understand the ramifications of that, and that's really, really frustrating. Especially when, and this is my final part, but it's completely relevant to what I've just been saying. The Ukrainian grain corridor in the Black Sea has now reached its pre-war capacity. Ukraine is a breadbasket of the world. It has now got to a point, because of the work we have been doing in assisting Ukraine, both from NATO's point of view and from Bulgaria, Romania, kind of bilaterally, trilaterally point of view, because we have helped Ukraine, they have been able to export grain and lots of other things as well. I'm hoping to get Exit on to talk about this in the next few days. But that grain corridor is now operating better than pre-war levels. This is insanely good. We have already crossed the limit of 500 ships and more than 10 million tons of cargo, said Dmitry Platenchuk, spokesperson for the Navy. So then that's why we're helping as well, because we're feeding the world, we're lubricating trade routes, and this is in our best interest to do so. It's in the world's best interest. Not just about morally helping Ukraine, although it is that. It's about everything else too. Anyway, here endeth the lesson. Take care. Thank you very much.